As a communication coach, trainer, speaker, and author, I'm delighted to be your host and excited to bring you insights and ideas to help you solve your communication conundrums. This is Amy Carroll, and the show is Partner Up with Amy Carroll, and this is the 72nd episode of my show. If you want to hear more about me or what the show is about, feel free to listen to previous episodes on my website, carrollcoaching.com, or go directly to the voiceamerica.com business channel. And you can download the app or just tune in using your favorite podcast app. If you missed last week's show, I interviewed Sarah Santacross, and we discussed how Sarah's been running a successful LinkedIn consulting business for over a decade, which inspired a yearning in her to create a global movement, encouraging people to bring more empathy and kindness to business and marketing. So be sure to check that out from last week, January 7th. And today my guest is Nancy Watt. Welcome, Nancy.
Hi, Amy. It's nice to see you.
You too. And Nancy, I don't know what conference it was. And we both know, it's pretty sure we met at an Applied Improv conference. And
Correct.
we'll explain to listeners in a minute what we mean by that. I don't know, was it the Toronto one? Was it, no, Montreal or?
My goodness, it could have been that far back, Amy.
Yeah.
Montreal in 2015, or we've been
Bristol.
to Oxford and Paris.
Oxford, yeah.
LA. Yeah, Oxford,
That's
I
right.
think.
Yeah, Oxford, Paris, that's right. Yeah, there were some good times. So, Nancy, I want to take a minute to tell the listeners about you because, oh my goodness, listeners, you are in for a fascinating conversation. Nancy delivers powerful, creative, and memorable sessions. She uses tools and techniques of improvisational theater. In fact, for the past 4 years, Nancy has been rated as one of the top 5 leadership workshops at the Microsoft Global Conference. Well done, Nancy.
Thank you.
I'm not surprised because I have seen you in action. And listeners, Nancy's workshops have been delivered to engineering and science departments at Harvard, Princeton, MIT, Rutgers, New Jersey Institute of Technology, University of Toronto, University of Waterloo, and McMaster University. Her work in the construction and engineering sector have led to collaborations with the American Society of Civil Engineers, Engineers Without Borders, the Deep Foundations Institute, the Society of Women Engineers, the Geo-professional Business Association, and many more. Nancy's trained at Second City's Improv, Conservatory, and sketch writing programs, both in Toronto and Chicago. She has a BA in psychology and sociology, a certificate in applied positive psychology. And she's, like myself, an applied improv practitioner. She's a graduate of Cornell's executive program in diversity and inclusion. She is also certified in AQai 2.0 and was the first graduating cohort of the Adaptability Quotient. And Nancy, do I say this right? AQAI, or how do you say that?
Oh, that is perfect.
Okay, yep. There we go. All right, I'm 10 for 10 right now. Let's see how I do. So, Nancy, I want to come back to the subject of positive psychology because this is a fascinating topic for me. And you, on your website, I remember reading, you describe it as a science of optimal human functioning. And rather than being a prescription to being positive all the time, it's more accurately, it more accurately determines how humans learn to suffer well. And that's what really got me because I am, I'm a girl who just likes to avoid suffering.
Right.
So I really want to hear more about this.
Oh, thank you. So, Marty Seligman is the past president of the American Psychological Association, and we credit him with really being the father of positive psychology. And traditionally, the discipline and the practice of therapeutic psychology has always been getting people back to normal or a baseline, or looking at the abnormal psychology and trying to have them recover in whatever facet that may be. The emerging world of positive psychology is what some practitioners call north of neutral. Neutral. What is it? What type of interventions and practices are people using to thrive? And me, like you, as you say, I try to avoid, suffering at all costs.
Oh, you do? Okay.
and it happens to be a fact of life. Yeah. We will suffer, our children will suffer, our teams and our organizations will suffer. And, some, when they are dealt life's big fat adversity, they fall down, and some stay down. Some
Yeah.
stay down, and others get back up. So what is that? What is that? That fascinates me, learning to suffer well. We talk about, the art and science of resiliency and hope and adaptability. And there have been, like all disciplines, the emerging sort of waves of where this is going, right? The darker side of positive psychology, and there's good research to show that, if we are happy all the time or positive all the time, that is bordering on fraudulence. And I want to take a moment to clarify that that is not what positive psychology is.
Right.
It's not some sort of PAP type of happyology, right? Like, oh God. But it is this study of how humans can thrive in the face of adversity and how we learn to suffer well. It's fascinating. And and it's now embedded in all sorts of organizational learning development programs, all sports psychology, all of that. It's really a great body of work.
As you're talking, a memory popped into my mind, and I don't know if it's an example of suffering well. When I first moved to Switzerland, I had a job at a hotel school. I was a student responsible for the student life, and they had major financial problems. So it looked like people were going to get fired, except I knew my job was protected. So it didn't occur to me. I left for the summer, had an amazing summer, whereas my friend, who was a receptionist and she had been warned she might lose her job, she didn't have a great summer because she was pretty sure she was going to lose her job when we got back. So we get back, I get called into the boss's office and I get fired. And I'm like,
oh my.
So it was a bit of shock. And they were having a team meeting, staff meeting later that day. And I asked my boss, I said, would you mind if I come to the meeting? Because I'd like to help people see how we can transition without me in this role. And that was like just hours later. And he was telling me, oh, Amy, you can go home, take the day off. And I'm like, oh, no, I'm good. And I mean, I was sad to lose my job. It was a shock and everything, though I was kind of amazed that I was able to, within a few hours, just say, well, let's see, how can we help this transition be as smooth as possible for the people who are going to stay here?
Fascinating.
Yeah, I was kind of shocked.
I love that. I love that. When you say, suffer well, we have the ability to define that for ourselves. And what I love about what you did, you and I were chatting earlier about adaptability, how we mentally and emotionally pivot. You immediately went into the future, not denying the pain and the sadness, as you say, about losing the job, but looking out for others, being of service, and knowing how the career, the job will be transitioned by others.
Yeah.
Great example. Great example.
It was funny because when I went into the meeting, no one wanted to look at me because they're carrying all this shame and embarrassment. And they're like, oh, I don't know how to react. And I was just like, hey guys. So I'll see what I'll be doing in a couple months. And yeah, that was also fascinating to see how uncomfortable it was for other people as well.
Right.
Yeah.
Excellent. Yeah.
So
it certainly is. I do we have a program called HAPPY, which is an acronym. It's HAPPY with an IE. It is how to apply positive psychology improv exercises. And
nice.
We pivot, we're doing these exercises experientially so that we are present. And so and we can take an adverse reaction and be able to reframe it in our mind and play it out accordingly using the academic evidence-based research of resiliency and hope and grit and mental flexibility, or the process of unlearning. All of these social science concepts are great to play with.
Yeah. So here's a very concrete example for listeners. Tell me if you came across this at the last, and it's a very simple improv exercise, which I'm sure you know. and though it hit me in the brain at the last improv conference, which was online just a few months ago, and several different sessions, it popped up the idea of new choice. Right. And so when you're in a position and you're suffering and you're unhappy and you don't know what to do about it, someone, you can either say to yourself or someone can say to you, new choice, and you come up with a new solution, so maybe you've lost your job. Oh, this is going to be terrible. New choice. Oh, this is going to be a lot of free time. New choice. Right. Oh, this is going to be a chance to start that art class. So it's that's to me a very concrete, great application of an improv exercise to use in that moment to reframe.
It is, and forces the individual to get out of that same thinking, force it. Some people call that new choice, Amy, and at Second City, we used to call that should have said. I should have said. And I played it yesterday with a group of engineers, and they have an improv scene, and they're going back and forth in a conversation, and then every once in a while I will call out should have said, and they have to retract their very last line and pivot and say something else. And it's fascinating to watch who is happy to do this, who is able to pivot, and who has a real speed bump, who is emotionally and intellectually invested in their thought pattern, in their way of thinking, way of knowing, way of being.
Yes.
And how we can alter that. It is necessary and creative, jarring, and
yes.
discomfort, as you know, is the point.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And sometimes it can be very joyful and delightful. The responses people 100%. Come up with.
100%. It so is. Everyone, they get to delight in themselves, which is the beauty of applied improv. For me, applied improv is tapping that intuitive knowledge that rarely sees the light of day. Our spontaneity gives us wisdom, and we discover something in ourselves, interestingly and importantly, only when we connect with another.
Say that again. Our spontaneity gives us wisdom.
Yes.
Beautiful.
Yes. Which is contrary, which might not sound intuitively, which might not be intuitive. I mean, right. How can we on an improv stage who look like we're just making stuff up, how is that wise? How does that tap a different type of knowledge and wisdom? And I tell you, the secret is that on an improv stage, when we are forced to be incredibly mindful and present, and we listen differently. Listening is a sacrificial act. Listening is a sacrificial act.
That's beautiful.
Listening as a sacrificial act forces me to be changed as a result of what I just heard.
Yeah.
I mean, imagine that. Imagine if we were able to have political discourse like that. Imagine if I was able to listen to, I don't know, my teenage son better than imagine if I was able to listen and allow myself the humility and the wisdom to be changed as a result of what I just heard.
Yeah.
And that is what taps that intuitive knowledge and that wisdom.
Yeah, that's amazing. I want to go off on 3 more tangents. I'm going to discipline myself because I want to come back to the topic of improv. And let's rewind a little bit for listeners, because just to be on the safe side, so everyone's on the same page, Nancy, give us your definition of improv and your definition of applied improv.
Right. Well, I would probably reiterate what I just said, Amy, that, I'm going to show you a slide here that when we have that intuitive knowledge that rarely sees the light of day, we are able to tap something that is not, that did not appear to us before. I know for some of our listeners and watchers today, they think improv, like, what the heck, right? That makes no sense. But when we connect in a playful and joyful way with meaning and with purpose, it gives us that powerful connection, because people don't truly connect with another human being through certainty, that we connect through vulnerability.
We
And
connect through vulnerability. Yes, yes, yes.
correct.
Yep.
We do not connect. We connect through vulnerability. We do not connect through certainty.
Yeah.
Certainty is akin to opinion, and
Right.
everybody's got one of those,
Yeah.
right? And that gives us this aha moment,
Mhm.
right? That connection and that discovery in ourselves, and the discovery of what we have just learned from listening
Mhm.
actively gives us that. So my definition of improv is that we tap an intuitive knowledge and spontaneity that
Mhm.
delights us and gives us some necessary wisdom through the necessity of discomfort.
Mhm.
And applied improv is, is the practical application of evidence-based social science. I'm sorry to sound like a geek when I say that, but about 4 years ago, Amy, someone called me at Microsoft, someone called me a Pracademic. And
Yes,
it
I
seems
love
to
that.
have stuck, right?
Pracademic.
Because I don't care what the theory says. I don't care what the paper says and the research. I mean, I deeply do, but it is synthetic knowledge. It does not
Mhm.
resonate with the individual or the team or the people I'm working with until they experience it,
Right.
until they bring themselves as an ensemble with a curiosity mindset, all of that. So it is the applied improv. I was working with some physicists from Princeton, and I tried to speak to them in their own language, right? And I said, think of it as a laboratory where we get to experiment with different states of being. And we know how, in scientific parlance, a phase change, for instance, right? We go from a solid and ice to water to steam, that
Mhm.
phase change. We can experience that as humans when we go from an intellectual state of mind to a creative one, to a deeply connected one. That experience, that meaningful and resonating experience, is what applied improv can deliver.
Mhm. Oh, that's beautiful. And I guess I'm going to guess that really spoke to the scientists.
It did. I was lucky because oh my God, Amy, I'm like that you listed some of my clients, and the more unconventional an arena, a venue I can do this, the better I like it. I did
bet.
it with a group who were incarcerated. I worked with a group
Wow.
of judges. I worked with give me the scientists, give me the most reticent people who don't think they are creative, or who, look at improv like some sort of, I don't know,
Silly
fluff or
pastime.
something.
Yeah.
And that's what I like. That's
Yeah.
what I like.
Yeah. So as you were speaking it, there's a book that I just started listening to today that I'm pretty sure you know the title of, and it's making me think about when you talk about thinking about improv and scientists, the book by Adam Grant, Think Again.
Love Adam Grant. Ada Wharton, the youngest tenured professor out of the University of Pennsylvania. He's
Wow.
great, and he's got a great podcast and is a wonderful speaker. He's how do we change our mind? Right?
Yes.
And he talks about some personas that we can become emotionally invested in when we have an opinion that we think is synonymous with fact. Newsflash, it is not. Right?
Mm-hmm.
He talks about being the prosecutor or the politician, and all with these different personas have a secondary investment in disseminating their opinion, making sure that their opinion is solidified. And he talks about things like the attention bias. Some of your listeners might have heard of that. Attention bias is where we seek out information that reaffirms our already established opinion.
Yeah.
It's why newscast, we have right wing and left wing. It's but the necessary humility to change our mind, and in improv parlance, more the strength and the courage to change our status, to withstand the necessary process of allowing ourselves to let go of what no longer works for us,
Mm-hmm.
and adopt a new way of thinking, a new way of being,
Yeah.
is what his research is about. And
Yeah.
it is fascinating. Great book.
Isn't it?
Highly recommend it.
Yes. And there was one quote I came across today. Those who cannot change their minds cannot change anything. George Bernard Shaw.
Lord.
Right?
I'm so stealing that. Where'd you get that?
That came from his book. Those who
okay.
cannot change their minds cannot change anything. George
Correct.
Bernard Shaw.
Ah, it was Shaw. Right.
Yes.
Right.
Makes sense, right?
Boy, that's a good one.
So, Nancy, I want to get into your social experiments.
Okay.
As you say, improv for good. And I'm
Yes.
sure you have some
thank
great
you.
stories to share.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Amy. It matters to me that what I do makes a difference,
Yeah.
right? Makes a difference in people's lives. And
Yep.
I know that we have something powerful going on here with Applied Improv. And,
Yeah.
and, and just having the joy and delight and the connection and the laughter, all well and good, no harm, no foul, nothing wrong with that. However, I've been involved with 3 different social experiments now, and they are immensely satisfying.
Okay.
The first one was lowering social anxiety disorder with a group of at-risk youth in the city that I live in. The youth aged 17 to 25 suffered from social anxiety disorder. Together with the clinicians and the psychologists and some social workers at this satellite mental health drop-in clinic here in
Yeah.
Hamilton,
Mhm.
we developed a 12-week improv boot camp. And oh my God, a more frightened group and incredibly creative, pierced, tattooed, wonderful, wonderful group of individuals I've had the pleasure of working with. And we had proper pre and post qualitative and quantitative measures to look at the lowering of that symptomology. That paper is published in Synapse, the Journal of Psychology, Neuroscience, and Behavior, and has since been replicated in about 20 different social agencies and hospitals across North America. How crazy cool is that? I'm still in touch with some of these people. I have, they call me Improv Mom because, and I am very, very fond of them. And then we continued when COVID hit, we continued online, and they called it, they called it not attention disorder. They called it connection deficit disorder because we didn't have that. So we continue to do it.
And how often in that original 12-week program, in how many times, many hours a week, or walk me through it?
It was a 1 2-hour workshop once a week for 12 weeks. And I was impressed that they came, more impressed that they came back.
Yes.
They came back, right?
Yes.
We had one young woman, and she came with her psychologist, she came with her therapist, and the therapist told me, don't ask Allison to do anything. And I'm like, but what? You did not do something. And literally, Amy, this 18-year-old young woman stayed under the table, and I tasked her with, there's an improv exercise called freeze. And it's where 2 players on stage, when someone calls freeze, they have to tableau. They absolutely have to freeze in the physicality. They get tapped out by another improviser who adopts their physicality and start a whole new scene. And so all Allison had to do from underneath the table was yell freeze. And she did. And she totally knew what she was doing. She would call it out at just the right point in the scene.
She became the director.
She did.
That's brilliant.
She totally did.
So you gave her a role of status and importance.
No, you're on to me.
That's fantastic. I love that. Yeah. Sometimes when I do an exercise and I've got somebody who's resistant, like, well, I really need an observer. Could you be the observer? And then right. And then I tell them because it's usually an enigma. It's some kind of thing that it's like it's a listening exercise, and there's information that one has that the other doesn't have, or vice versa. And so the observer gets to have the inside scoop and knows all the information and then goes around seeing, assessing how people are doing. So yeah.
Love that tactic. That's so smart. Love that.
Hey, listen, let's pause here. We're going to take a short break. And when we come back, I want to hear another of your social experiments if you'd be willing to share it. Okay, great. So listeners, you can connect with and find out more about Nancy Watt directly on her website. And that's nancywatt.com. Let me spell that. NancyWattcom.com. And listeners, if you're ready to take your superhero partner powers into the next decade, join me for my online leadership presence course. You'll find details on my website, carrollcoaching.com. That's 2 R's and 2 L's. When we come back from the break, we'll be hearing more from Nancy, so stay tuned. You're listening to Partner Up with Amy Carroll on the Voice America Business Channel. Welcome back. My guest today is Nancy Watt. We've been discussing how applied improv is such a powerful and effective way to teach people life skills. In fact, we're going to move now into another example of a social experiment that Nancy did. And so Nancy, I'm just going to turn it over to you. I want to hear all about the details of this one.
Oh, that's so fun. Well, I was approached by it was something, an organization called the LEPC, a local employment planning board, who was struggling with the number of individuals who were unemployed for a long time. And they also had a list of those skills that employers were needing more than anything else. And I tell you, organizations like this have been doing interview skills and resume writing workshops to death, and nothing was working. And so they thought, well, how about we bring in Nancy and have a much more experiential, Pracademic type, improv boot camp. And that is indeed what I did. A 6-week improv boot camp. We took 15 individuals who had been unemployed for a lengthy period of time for a multitude of reasons, social reasons, mental health reasons, physical, limitations, all of that. And we took the list of skills that employers were demanding, like adaptability, communication, listening, collaboration, all of those so-called soft skills that this group of individuals were really lacking.
Okay.
Over 6 weeks, I built an ensemble out of this wonderful motley crew of individuals. They were just wonderful. And, and we had audacious goals for this. We said at the end of 6 weeks, 80% of the participants in that study would have achieved one of 3 goals. 1, that they would be gainfully employed full-time. 2, that they would be engaged in some sort of retraining program at their community college or something like that. Or thirdly, that they had identified something in that 6-week program whereby they needed some counseling, they needed some support. And we met those goals, and it blew the charts off of. They had never had anything so successful. If you don't mind me saying, it was wildly crazy successful. And we're talking to the insurance industry because they are plagued with people on long-term disability and all of those things. So I tell you, there's this one woman, and her name is Christine. She was the most introverted. She was just unbelievably shy, and we did this character game, and she personified herself as a mouse. Oh, it's a long story, but suffice to say, Amy, that this woman came out in the most joyful, creative way. And her entire career, for over 30 years, she had this administrative jobs, filing jobs, quiet jobs, just, that. And she now is the assistant manager of a retail store in a mall it's called Bed Bath & Beyond. I don't know if you're,
we have that in the US, not in Europe.
I mean, look at the skills that she had to acquire to excel and thrive in that job, right? That she manages employees, she manages customers, she's, doing creative merchandising, all of that. And she loves it. That was revelatory. that, you know,
Wow.
and we have since, and then we had a train the trainer program as well. So I trained a bunch of the other social workers and, employment counselors to be able to use some very specific coaching and improv activities to get them to listen differently or, collaborate more effectively and that. So that was a crazy social experiment and one that is ongoing in different avenues. And then thirdly, and this is one close to my heart, and I know yours too, diversity and inclusion.
Yes.
Diversity and inclusion is a monster and something that I believe is the seminal conversation of the decade, right?
Okay.
With our changing workforce, with our demographics, with the rate of change of our workplace and technological change.
Right.
If we don't get this right, organizations fail, and we see it, and we see it. So part of what fascinates me around the adaptability quotient and the social science around applied improv and some tactics that we use is the process of unlearning. A great researcher here is Barry O'Reilly. He's done a lot of work in this regard. It is my contention that organizations who have not met their diversity, equity, and inclusion goals are stymied. They are stuck in this compliance versus culture. They have not moved the behavioral dial because they have not unlearned what is necessary before they learn a new way.
Okay.
Right? And it is, and one of the wonderful things about the exploratory work, the experiential and discovery work of applied improv is that we get to see our unconscious bias at work.
Fantastic.
We get to see where our privilege and status shows up, right? Do
you have a concrete example of how that shows up? Because this is really fascinating to me.
Sure. So we have, you are familiar with allyship, for example. We parallel what it means to be an ally with what it means to be in a cast with an ensemble. But we have to allow ourselves a certain amount of vulnerability and acceptance and admitting of who we are, where we come from, and what we bring to the table. That is where people shield themselves from the get-go. They, and I often say, information is just giving out, but communication is getting through. And when we play status games and privilege games, and we understand the status change in a scene, we debrief that and we dissect it through dialogue, and people share how they felt when they had their status changed. Or perhaps something like code switching. Many of your listeners will know, that term. The code switching means that I pretend to be something I'm not in the environment that I am. It often really exacerbates things like the imposter syndrome and feelings of fraudulence. But of course, we feel compelled to do that because that is the culture, that is the environment.
We think it's expected of us.
100%. The prevailing, if the prevailing culture is white male, then they are not realizing that code switching is even going on.
Right.
Until they go into a deep immersive 4-week diversity and inclusion improv where they get to, try on the different lens of age, gender, ethnicity, socioeconomic class, and where do they belong and where do they not? And how does their bias show up? And how do they then pivot out of that experience? It's fascinating and transformative. And I was very lucky to do this in a large engineering organization. And why they decided to do this as a very unconventional part of their diversity and inclusion initiative is the fact that, they have 800 employees. We put 200 of their employees through 8 4-week improv bootcamp cohorts, diversity and inclusion improv series. And so that was 200. And what is compelling is that the research shows that in order to change make an effective change in an organization or society. We do not need 50% of the population to have a difference in mindset or a change of mind. In actual fact, the tipping point is closer to 20. It is that once 20% of an organization has embraced and accepted their unconscious bias, they are full allyship, they have that mentality, they are understanding their bias, they understand bystander interventions. 20% can create a cascade. 20%
Nancy,
is what is needed for that social contagion. And that is what we did in
this
this
is
engineering.
so exciting to hear that. 20% is so
Isn't that
doable.
fascinating?
I mean, we're not like, yeah. I mean, compared to what people are trying to do with herd immunity, that this is a piece of cake. This is so doable.
It is. It
Wow.
is. And then and that 20% becomes so empowered and invigorated, and they do not persuade others. It is much more of attraction over promotion.
Okay.
It is much more their mindset is extremely based in positive psychology, right? That this is not only the way of the future, but there's a strong business case for it. There's a better culture. There's a deep and meaningful sense of belonging in that organization, and their talent acquisition reflects it. Right? Because as we all know, people who they want to attract the best talent, the best engineers, the best scientists to this organization. And those scientists that they are interviewing the organization in turn and asking, what are you doing with your diversity and inclusion? What is this organization like? God bless millennials for doing that.
Right.
And so they are able to espouse, well, this is what we're doing because it is experiential. It is not ticking a box. It is not compliance. It is culture.
Yeah. I don't think you know this about me. I'm in 2 improv troupes, and one improv troupe is a group of scientists who are millennials.
What?
And me.
Stop it. I did not know this, Amy. Oh, for heaven's sake.
And I feel so lucky and grateful to be a part of this group of, they're hyper intelligent, they're funny, they're playful. And I see with the influence of the other women, there's this expectation, and they're holding them to a higher bar of, hey guys, we're not going to play that game because of this, or no, that doesn't work, and they're all holding each other accountable. And, when I do something wrong and make a mistake, they'll just casually point it out. And it's like, when someone says, you got spinach in your teeth, it's sort of that just straightforward, great. Okay. Let me, fix that. Yeah.
So interesting that they hold others to the same bar. I was having a conversation with a physicist friend of mine, and she was talking about a very difficult conversation that some female physicists were having, and they had this necessary confronting type conversation where they were saying things like, well, no, I don't wear pink or a floral shirt to work. I'm a scientist. It burgeoned that fascinating conversation around how femininity was synonymous with weakness and what you show up as and who you are and all of that. And it was those conversations are necessary.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Such immensely satisfying.
I totally get it. Wow. And, one of this other area that, as you describe, is also quite the monster is that of adaptability quotient.
Oh,
so let's take a deep dive into that. Now, I did a little bit of research, so I'm going to give listeners my understanding of AQ, and then you can give us if you got like a sexy definition, we'll take that.
Oh, you're the best.
Okay, so listeners, the definition I have is it's the ability to determine what's relevant, to forget obsolete knowledge, overcome challenges, and adjust to change in real time. Okay, take it from there, Nance.
Perfect. Like, listen to that, right? That is everyone, as a skill, adaptability has gone from interesting to important. And I often like to say that Charles Darwin, in his Origin of the Species, when he talked about the survival of the fittest, he was not talking about the fastest, he was not talking about the strongest. He said that those who survive are those who are able to adapt. And indeed, it is what humans do. It is what we have always done. We adapt to our environment. However, right now, we are living in such exponential change. It is not that change is not happening, but the rate of change is exponential and important. The research shows that, this is Thomas Friedell's work, that the technological change in society is far outpacing the ability of human adaptation.
Oh, wow.
So, right? Like, look at that. And while his research shows that, we are here and we are unable to adapt through this global pandemic, and, the last almost 2 years now, we're more like here. Like, look at that. That is just, it is worthy of our attention and respect, because the ability to adapt and the consequences of how this can work for us is relevant and timely and important. So exactly as you say, that it's our capacity to adjust one's thoughts and behavior in order to effectively respond. That sounds academic, and it is. What we bring in my creative agency is the experience of adapting. What does that feel like? How do we adapt, and under what circumstances? And so the UK company called AQai delivered the new social science metric, and it is a validated and reliable social science quotient, whereby we look at 3 things, and they call it the ACE model. And the ACE model, the A stands for our ability. How and to what extent do we adapt, right? And under this are the social science concepts of our grit and our mindset, our ability to unlearn, our resilience, and interestingly, something called mental flexibility. Mental flexibility is that ability whereby we hold 2 seemingly opposing concepts in balance. Law schools do this well. We need to be able to hold 2 opposing sides. Those people who can do that are more adaptable. So those 5 components are in ability. C stands for character. Who adapts and why? Interestingly, we look in things like our thinking style and our motivation style and our emotional range. And fascinatingly, we look at the science of hope. Hope.
Say more about that.
Turns out hope is tactical. Great researcher here is Shane Lopez. He does something called hope mapping. We often hear some organizations say, hope is not a strategy. Silicon Valley says that all the time. And I get that. Oh my God, I get that. Of course it is not. However, individuals, humans who have a higher level of hope are better able to detect, foresee, and manage the obstacles in their path to achieving a goal, right? They just have that ability to withstand and bear all of the adversity that comes at them. It is very strongly, it is one of the 17 components in this social science metric that is very strongly correlated with many other components. And then we have E in the ACE model. The E stands for environment. Where do we adapt? What type of, under what type of workplace do we need whereby adaptability is not only there, but encouraged, right? So we look at our company support, our team support, our emotional health, right? How many positive versus negative moments are we having at work?
Mhm.
Our ability to manage the stress at work, right? This hugely influences our ability to adapt, because as you know, when we are deeply under stress, our cognitive capacity narrows. We cannot think. We do not have the same ideation or brainstorming ability that is so necessary for innovative thinking. We simply can't do it. So more than anything else, why? And they've got some big players now. My goodness, the United Nations and Microsoft and GSK, like there are some big, people are taking AQ very seriously.
Mhm.
They're looking at what they can do to really help those individuals who are maybe having a difficult time adapting, and looking at how their environment can be conducive to better human adaptability. It's a very interesting body of work.
And improv seems like it was made for teaching this.
Right?
Are we a little biased? Maybe.
Oh
my gosh.
How true is that? That is what we are forced to do. I mean, many of your listeners who might be familiar with improv are familiar with yes and.
Oh yeah, let's talk about that.
Yes means we accept the reality that is what has been created for us on stage, what the circumstances are in society today, what lockdown, what limited resources, what budgetary constraints, whatever. Doesn't mean I have to like it, but I need to accept.
Yeah.
Albert Einstein said, man should look at what is, not at what he wants there to be.
Yes.
Simple acceptance. And then the and is my, on stage where I get to advance and heighten this scene. And that's where I go. And how humans learn and how applied improv is so, oh my heavens, it's like a Venn diagram to adaptability quotient, right? I mean,
completely.
The yes is an experience in vulnerability. Like, I don't know what I have to say yes to. I don't know what I have to adapt to. I don't know what I'm going to have to do on stage, but I know that I have to. That's the rule. I have to say yes. That is vulnerable. It's risky and it's vulnerable.
Yeah.
And is an example of human empowerment. Yeah. And all pedagogical research looks at those two scaffolding, that process of learning. Vulnerability, empowerment, vulnerability, empowerment. We learn a little bit and then we like what we've learned and we want to share it. And we learn a little bit more and then we become even more empowered. And adaptability is no different. It's going to be hugely important for our children. It's going to be hugely important for our organizations. If the futurists and the sociologists are correct, we are going to see more change in society in the next 10 years than we have in the last 100.
Holy smokes.
I mean, it is hard to wrap our head around that. There's a great documentary called Seeing the Invisible, Adaptability and the Future of Work. It's a quick, impactful, something like 11-minute documentary.
Seeing the future.
Yep, seeing the invisible.
Oh, excuse me, seeing the invisible.
Yep, seeing the invisible, adaptability and the future of work. It is, it goes far beyond driverless cars. That's just the beginning.
Yeah. Okay.
Right.
Nancy, when I'm listening to you, I mean, that's what you've just said about in the next 10 years, it's shocking. And I think I can't fully digest it and get, my brain I can't quite get my head around it. At the same time, the other part of me is I'm not feeling panic because I know, like I've seen how I've managed through the pandemic. Now, granted, I live a privileged life. Yep. I financially, even though everything tanked for 9 months, I was still stable. Nonetheless, my brain could have really messed with my mind. My mind could have messed with my brain. One of those two things. And I think that from the years of improv, there were a couple of weeks at the beginning and a couple of weeks about 6 months in, there was a little wobbling time, and the rest of the time I was good to go.
Right. Look at that. I love that example. Of course you were. And not to take anything away from the fact that I, like you, live COVID privilege, right? Like
Absolutely.
but at the same time, I will tell you that I had that when COVID hit, I lost 90% of my revenue. I had jobs in 4 different countries and 9 different cities, and everything came to a screeching halt.
Yeah.
So I pivoted online, built a light board, continued to deliver virtual workshops, did Adaptability Quotient, and went there. And I did that only because I had this armor, this resiliency built in from our improv days.
Our brains have, it's paid off our brains. Listen, we're going to wrap up, and before we do, I really want people, you've been writing on that very cool thing called a light board. Would you just put the website on there? So
sure.
Listeners,
I love my toy. It's so great. That way I don't have
awesome.
To
and this is something, if you're only listening to the program, you might want to check out the video version of this so you can see this light board in action. Otherwise, just go directly to lightboarddepot.com.
Yeah.
And you can check it out.
Is that, I'm sorry for is that legible, Amy?
Lightboarddepot.com. It sure is.
Yep.
Okay, girl, we're going to wrap up here. Listeners, send me your communication conundrums, clashes, challenges, mishaps, blunders, successes via email or social media, and I'll discuss them in the future. And if you want to connect with Nancy, you could go directly to her website, nancywattcom.com, and that's NancyWattCom.com. And be sure to switch on, tune in, listen up, and be inspired, because next week, my last weekly show, I'm hoping and expecting to pop in periodically. Though on my final weekly show, I will be having a conversation with my sister, Pat Kirkland, who is the founder of the Predator-Prey Partner model that I talk a lot about. And it's the reason I do what I do today. We're going to be getting into the nitty-gritty of what I believe is one of the most powerful voice techniques to help you project gravitas and confidence and ward off a predator attack. You can check out my website for more information. You can connect with me on social media. And if you're game for more, I'm going to be hopping on the Facebook Live 5 minutes past the hour for a short chat on today's show. Thank you, Nancy. This has been a wonderful conversation.
Oh, you're delightful. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Best to you. All the best for a wonderful 2022, Amy.
Yes, you too, Nancy. And to you listeners, you've been listening to Partner Up with Amy Carroll on the Voice America Business Channel. Happy partnering, everyone.